Peter Hayden Dinklage was born on June 11, 1969, in Morristown, New Jersey, into a world that had already decided how it would measure worth. It was a world obsessed with appearance, height, strength, and conformity. From the moment Peter entered that world, he stood apart. He was born with achondroplasia, a genetic condition that causes dwarfism. His height would never match society's expectations, but what no one could predict was how far his mind would rise beyond them. Peter grew up in a modest, middle-class household. His father worked in insurance sales, and his mother was an elementary school music teacher. Their home was not filled with luxury, but it was filled with something far more powerful: acceptance. His parents never raised him to believe he was less than anyone else. They never allowed pity to shape his identity. At home, Peter was simply a child, free to explore, learn, and imagine. But outside the walls of his home, reality was different. From a young age, Peter became aware of how people reacted to him. Strangers stared longer than necessary. Some whispered. Others spoke directly, without understanding how their words landed. Even as a child, Peter sensed that the world saw his body before it saw his humanity. School introduced him to his first real battles. Children can be honest in cruel ways, and Peter often found himself standing alone. He was excluded from games, laughed at for his appearance, and treated as different before he ever spoke. These moments hurt deeply, but they also planted something inside him: awareness. He realized early that society builds boxes for people, and once placed inside, it expects them to stay there. Instead of collapsing under the weight of judgment, Peter began observing the world carefully. He listened, he watched, he learned. He noticed how confidence could silence mockery, and how intelligence could command respect. Slowly, he began developing a sharp wit and a powerful sense of humor. Humor became a way to protect himself, but also a way to connect. It allowed him to take control of situations that once made him feel powerless. As Peter grew older, anger occasionally replaced sadness. There were moments when frustration boiled over, when he questioned why life had to be harder for him than for others. But rather than letting that anger consume him, he redirected it inward, transforming it into determination. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted control over his own story. Everything changed when Peter discovered theater. For the first time in his life, he stepped into a space where physical appearance mattered less than emotional truth. On stage, he was no longer the boy people stared at. He was a character with purpose, emotion, and voice. Acting gave him something priceless: freedom. Theater became more than an activity. It became a lifeline. Through acting, Peter learned how to express feelings he had buried for years. Pain, anger, hope, confidence, all of it found a voice on stage. He wasn't acting to impress others. He was acting to understand himself. His teachers noticed something different about him. Peter approached acting with seriousness and discipline beyond his age. While others treated it as a hobby, Peter treated it as a calling. He studied scripts deeply. He listened carefully. He worked harder than most. Acting wasn't about applause. It was about purpose. As graduation approached, Peter faced a difficult truth. Wanting to act professionally meant entering an industry that was brutally unforgiving, especially to those who did not fit traditional standards. He knew the risks. He knew rejection was inevitable. Yet the idea of living a life without pursuing acting felt far worse than the fear of failure. Peter enrolled at Bennington College to study drama. Bennington was a place filled with creativity, experimentation, and ambition. For the first time, Peter was surrounded by people who believed in art as deeply as he did. It was inspiring, but also intimidating. He knew that talent alone would not be enough. The real world would demand resilience. During his college years, Peter refined his craft. He explored different styles of acting, challenged his emotional limits, and developed a strong artistic identity. He was not interested in being noticed for his appearance. He wanted to be respected for his ability. That distinction mattered deeply to him. After graduating, Peter stood at a crossroads. He could choose a safer path, one with stability and fewer rejections. Or he could chase the uncertain dream of acting. Without hesitation, he chose uncertainty. He moved to New York City with limited money, no powerful connections, and no guarantee of success. New York tested him immediately. The city was loud, fast, and indifferent. Auditions were constant reminders of how unforgiving the industry could be. Casting calls often reduced him to stereotypes, characters written as jokes, sidekicks, or fantasy creatures without depth. Many roles felt humiliating, not because of their difficulty, but because of how little dignity they carried. Peter made a decision that would shape his entire career. He refused roles that disrespected him or others like him. This choice came at a heavy cost. Turning down work meant turning down money. It meant longer struggles, smaller apartments, and deeper uncertainty. There were nights when survival itself felt like an achievement. He worked odd jobs to support himself. He lived modestly. He questioned how long he could continue. Doubt visited him often, especially during moments of isolation. But quitting was never an option. Deep inside, Peter believed that accepting disrespect would damage him far more than poverty ever could. Those early years were not glamorous. There were no headlines, no awards, no applause. There was only discipline, only patience, only the quiet belief that something better awaited him. Not because the world owed him anything, but because he was preparing for it. Peter focused on his craft relentlessly. He studied human behavior. He watched great performances. He learned how silence could be as powerful as dialogue. While others chased attention, Peter chased mastery. Slowly, something began to shift. Though opportunities were rare, people who worked with him noticed his seriousness, his intelligence, and his refusal to settle for shallow work. He was building a reputation, not a loud one, but a strong one. By the early 2000s, after nearly a decade of struggle, Peter stood on the edge of something new. He didn't know it yet, but every rejection, every refusal, every difficult choice had prepared him for a moment that would change his life forever. That moment was coming. By the early 2000s, Peter Dinklage had already spent nearly a decade living on the edge of uncertainty. The dream that once felt exciting now felt heavy. Not because he had lost faith in acting, but because the world seemed slow to recognize his worth. Yet, this period of silence was shaping him in ways that success never could. Peter's daily life in New York was built around discipline. Mornings often began with auditions that led nowhere. Afternoons were spent working jobs that paid just enough to survive. Nights were quiet, filled with reflection, frustration, and determination. While others measured progress in fame or money, Peter measured progress in growth. Every rejection became feedback. Every insult became fuel. The entertainment industry had a clear pattern when it came to someone like him. Casting directors rarely imagined him as a leading man, a romantic figure, or a complex protagonist. Instead, they saw novelty. They saw limitations. They saw stereotypes. Many auditions felt insulting before he even spoke a line. Time and time again, Peter was offered roles that reduced him to a joke. Characters with no backstory, no emotional depth, and no dignity. Roles written only to be laughed at, not understood. Accepting such roles would have meant visibility, maybe even steady income. But Peter understood something critical. The roles you accept shape the future you are allowed to have. He said no, again and again. Each refusal was risky. In an industry where actors are easily replaced, saying no can feel like professional suicide. But Peter believed that if he accepted disrespect early, he would be trapped by it forever. He chose long-term respect over short-term survival. These decisions made his journey harder. Financial pressure increased. There were moments when he questioned whether his principles were unrealistic. Friends worried about him. Some suggested he lower his standards. Others believed he was waiting for a miracle that might never come. But Peter was not waiting for luck. He was preparing for alignment, the moment when opportunity and readiness meet. During these years, he leaned heavily on theater and independent projects. Theater, unlike film and television, cared more about performance